Labyrinth Legend is a dungeon crawling action-adventure that was originally released on Android and iOS back in 2019 and 20. It offers players a satisfying hack-and-slash looting gameplay system and is all brought to life in a retro pixel art style. Thanks to Azdin from Grinning Games, who's written this review for us. He's a regular writer on the channel. Let him know if you enjoy it down in the comments. In Labyrinth Legend, you take control of different classes and go forth deeper into the fabled labyrinth. It will see you facing off against monstrous bosses, and it requires nerves of steel. NIS America has brought it over to the Nintendo Switch with new features such as a brand new dungeon and new story elements, as well as a new class. But is this a legendary adventure, or is it best left in the labyrinth, aka the eShop? Well, let's find out. The Kingdom of Kanata is home to a mysterious labyrinth that houses a lost royal treasure. Drawn by the allure of these riches, you decide that perhaps you can reclaim it, and thus your adventure begins. As far as narrative exposition and reasoning go, that's about as much as you're gonna get. The responses of the local townsfolk do change with each run. They may have a little more to tell you about themselves, or the labyrinth, or indeed those who never made it back. And while the story does indeed develop as the game goes on, it's never the heart of the game. In this instance, that goes to the gameplay. The focus here being that one more run mentality. Whether you're playing alone or in couch co-op, the game is a dungeon crawler with randomly generated levels full of loot to grab and enemies to slay. It's worth saying right off the bat, this isn't a roguelite. When you die, you have the option to retry at the start of a dungeon or take on the boss one more time. The labyrinths themselves are broken down into ecosystems, each with their own scenery and monsters, a bit like biomes, and you have to find and defeat the one that holds the key to open the door to the next floor. Sounds very familiar. Character control is very responsive, and if you're not a fan of spamming the attack buttons, you can simply hold them down. While I still mashed away, it's nice to have that option, especially after a particularly long session, but does feel like a bit of a hang-up from its mobile roots. You can change the mappings of buttons and set it exactly how you want it. It is slightly irritating that a couple of the most important buttons are bound to the same command. So for example, when standing still, it will perform your skill, but when you're moving, that will then be your dash. In my opinion, using two different buttons for two different commands makes sense, especially when you've got enough. It's something you get used to, but once again, a little bit of a hang-up from its mobile roots. Now, due to the fact that each level layout is randomized, exploration is highly recommended as there are rare, powerful monsters to defeat that can potentially drop that run-changing piece of gear. These can also be found locked behind tolled doors, requiring specific amounts of coin to open. Now, enemies will drop random loot such as weapons and armor, but also hearts to replenish your health and coins. No two items are the same and are ranked by the amount of stars they have. Equipment can have properties such as extra defense or lower attack, and if you find your perfect item or piece of equipment, then the blacksmith in the village can increase its attributes even further. To do this though, you're going to need ore, which can be found in the dungeons, or for a fee, you can have the miner collect some for you. Between your runs, you're going to want to consider how you upgrade your character in other ways. There is an armory that sells equipment, and a store which sells upgrades, and as you'd expect, these increase the amount of healing potions you can carry, upgrade your magic meter, and will even help you to learn more powerful moves for each of the 10 different weapons. Needless to say, you'll be coming back a lot to buy and sell and then upgrade accordingly. There are 3 different classes with which to play. There's the Ranger, who's an all-rounder with the special ability to block. The Wizard, who uses staves and spells, obviously. Their skill is able to replenish all the magic meters, but with the risk that you have to be entirely stationary to do so. And finally, the NIGHTCRAWLER. This is the newcomer to the series who specializes in close quarters combat, damaging enemies when dashing into them, which can temporarily boost all stats. Something that's nice to see but not always the case in these games is the ability to create your own character. It's a relatively simple affair, tasking you with naming them, changing a few of their aesthetic qualities, and selecting that class. It's reasonably limited, but it's better than not having it at all. Each save file allows for a different character to be created, and you can then use these for local co-op. There's a tavern in the town that allows 4 players to create their characters, albeit I didn't have the chance to try multiplayer properly. It didn't stop me from creating one for each class and then swapping them during the adventure. I was happy to see that the characters aren't tied to their own story progression, as this enhances the pacing while avoiding the game becoming too stale. The ability to continue the same adventure while quick swapping between them is a nice touch. As you'd expect with this style of dungeon crawler, the biggest appeal is the pick up and play quality. There are many different weapons to choose from and runes that allow you to cast elemental spells. The screen will fill up with enemies who are ready to take you down, and it's all about your own skills with the attacking and dodging mechanics that make them so compelling. We've seen seen similar qualities in games like The Binding of Isaac, Hades, and Enter the Gungeon, to name just a few. For those fellow min-maxing nerds, you are shown damage numbers. Not everyone likes that, as we saw on the recent Monster Hunter Rise, but here it does allow for effective changes of weapons and gear, and it just makes sense. To emphasize how much of a skill-based game this is, although the Strider is the only character that can guard against attacks, they can all dodge away from the enemy. But to do this, you'll need to keep your eye out for the exclamation mark. That'll be your cue to dodge out of the way, and if done correctly, you'll completely avoid damage. But with that guarding character, you have the option to parry. This will then dish some damage back to the enemy that's attacked you, and slightly alters the way that you have to play. As you'd hope, the game has some excellent boss fights. You'll be learning move patterns, and it was nice to see that each of them is themed after their respective dungeons. They offer a decent challenge, but the balancing on some of them wasn't quite right, and it felt like you almost had to grind for better gear before beating them. Now, if you are defeated by the boss, you'll have a chance to retry from the beginning of the battle. This also replenishes your healing potions. Alternatively, you can always return to the village or to the entrance of the current dungeon. You may have noticed from the footage that I have a companion from time to time, and you'd be right. Riding the boat near the tavern takes you to an island where you can randomly generate a little monster pet. These can then be taken on your adventure with you. They don't fight for you though, they offer passive buffs and healing, and they look quite cute. It would have been nice if they could fight alongside you. There are a couple of extra modes thrown in there as well. I guess you could call these modifiers, things that start you out with absolutely nothing. They make it feel a touch more like a roguelike, but a roguelike in its default form it is not, being more of a standard dungeon crawler allowing constant progression. Finally, you've got the arena mode, where you'll be fighting against waves and waves of enemies. There won't be any loot drops, and it's all about the longer you can survive, the higher your score, and the better the rewards. Overall, for gameplay and controls, it's a fun little time, but certainly compulsive, and it does enough for fans of the genre, but it doesn't quite go toe-to-toe with some of the genre greats that we already have on the Switch. Gameplay scores 15 out of 20, and the controls also score 15 out of 20. The visuals use an eye-popping, vibrant colour palette that can make these 2D style games really stand out. It reminds me of an amalgamation of The Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past or Stardew Valley combined with Enter the Gungeon. Animations do a decent job at covering the ferocity of enemies and the charm of the village inhabitants, and that exaggerated weapon swing reminds me of the Final Fantasy Adventures game. The lighting and effects all look decent, with some nice touches such as the parallax fog. The UI does show its mobile heritage in the way that it's been implemented. Again, whether that's a positive or a negative is down to your personal preference. One bugbear is that armors aren't shown on the character, so if you equip new items, it's not actually displayed. Only your weapon will be shown. When it comes to performance then, I didn't notice any frame drops or performance stutters, with everything moving along nicely, and thank goodness the text size is legible enough. From an audio standpoint, the game has a mix of catchy tunes, once again taking inspiration from 16-bit era classics. The village song in particular reminds me of Monster Hunter Freedom Unite's hub song. It's quite placid and the percussion and flute really suit the environments. Visuals and performance score 14 out of 20 and the audio scores 16 out of 20. Labyrinth Legend is going to set you back £13.49 or your regional equivalent and has a 260 megabyte download. There is no physical version and it's a fun game and I really do like dungeon crawlers, but comparative to some of the others on Switch and for the quality of the product you're getting overall, I feel like it's a bit too steep. If it was just a little bit more polished or had an online mode, for example, then it could happily justify its price, and there is a chance the developers might add these in some future DLC, but as it stands, I'd say the ideal price would be around about £8 or your regional equivalent. Still, if you're after a new couch co-op 2-player experience, and which offers perhaps less of a barrier to entry than some of the aforementioned games, this may be a viable choice for you. Overall for me though, I give value 14 out of 20. To conclude, Labyrinth Legend is perhaps one of the better mobile phone games that deserves to be on Nintendo Switch. It's easy to pick up and play in short bursts or for a long session. It doesn't excel enough though to make it a must-buy purchase right now. For me, it would definitely be one to add to your wait for a sale list. Thanks to Azdin for writing that one. Hopefully it's given you enough information to make your decision about whether you pick it up or not. And thanks to all of you that enjoy the channel. As always, for all things Switch all the time, keep it Switch up. Cheers guys. See ya!